Hey brother, thank you for sending me your email earlier today. I've had a chance to read it a few times, thought about it a good bit. This is my third or fourth take making a video trying to talk through some of this because I have things to say to you, but I also want to share them in a way that is useful to other men who are stuck in sexless, low intimacy marriages like yours. So I want to read this one sentence you said to me and then go from there. You said, Sven, you know I do a really good job of filling my life with friends, activities, and enjoyment. But how does a man self-source intimacy? How do you replace the touch and feel of a woman? This is what I haven't found any answers about just yet. All right, so, well, to answer that, how do you self-source intimacy? I'd like to talk about that first. The first thing to understand about self-sourcing intimacy is, what is intimacy? By the textbook definition, it means to be closely acquainted with, familiar, or close. So how do you self-source being closely acquainted, familiar, and close? And so this might seem obvious to some people, but really, brother, to self-source intimacy is to be closely familiar and acquainted with yourself, deeply acquainted with yourself, but more importantly, to fully and deeply and radically accept that self. And that's actually usually what's going on here. You see, when a man says he's not sure how to self-source intimacy, it's that intimacy for him is actually this thing where he wants somebody else to be closely acquainted, familiar, and close, but for a reason, so that they could accept him. Now that is the difference usually with a man in a sexless marriage and a man in a thriving marriage. A man in a thriving marriage, and I'm talking about a later stage marriage, not a brand new one, because the guy in a brand new marriage who's only been at this a little while will probably get to the same stage also, where he's got some value and worth wrapped up in other people. But at late stage, guys that have been at this for, a couple decades, when they're feeling this frustration, what's going on is they're really feeling their own deficit of their sense of self-worth, or a feeble sense of self-worth. And they see intimacy as a path to experience closeness, somebody else being closely acquainted with them and familiar with them, but for the express benefit of feeling accepted. Now this is why, just to kind of go back through our three main stages of repairing a sexless marriage, we have these three stages. That very first stage is you must change your relationship with yourself. Every man I have ever spoken to in a sexless marriage, and I've spoken to tons, they all generally have one thing in common. They all have a very feeble sense of self-worth. They all, let's say about half of them, actually feel like they have a good sense of self-worth. But when I ask them, well, tell me about that. What is your value and worth? Why do you have the value and worth you have? They give me a story that their value and worth is basically tied to some form of achievement, performance, duty, and really all kinds of other things that can fluctuate, things that can go up and down. I like to use the metaphor of like the stock market, right? Imagine if your self-worth was like an index fund. It has its high days, it has its low days, it has its high days, it has its low days. That's the story that the majority of human beings on planet Earth live in when it comes to self-worth. And if you have your low days, a man who's got that kind of self-worth story, that's when he looks to a partner to basically bolster or like support him. And this is so pervasive, we actually consider it normal. And though it is common, it's everything but normal. It's unhealthy to have your self-worth tied up in other people. Doesn't that make it not self-worth, but other worth? But this is exactly what usually happens. And so I know you don't think that you have self-worth tied up in your wife, but there's some giveaways in your email, specifically where you talk about her lack of respect. And usually when men are seeing a partner's disinterest or behavior as a lack of respect, I've never seen an exception. That man actually does not have a very full and abiding and stable sense of self-respect. You see, everywhere I don't have my tank full as a man, I will seek to fill that deficit with other people. And so let's just say I have a self-worth tank. If that tank drops to 80%, I go seek the 20% of that's deficit from other people. I have a self-respect tank, and if that tank drops to 70%, well, in that feeling of that 30% deficit, I go and I look for somebody to give me self-respect. That's a really reliable pattern I've seen everywhere. When men are filling their own tank, self-sourcing, to use your term from the email, when our tanks are full, we don't look for other people to fill them anymore. And so when a man is saying, like, I don't feel this, I don't feel that, I don't feel this, and she's not giving it to me, it's a dead giveaway that his belief system in that moment is oriented around getting his needs met from outside of himself, which is, again, so pervasive that people even promote this today as though it's somehow healthy. But it's not healthy to have your intangible needs be met by other people, regardless of what people say. It makes you a victim, first of all, and it makes them a villain anytime, by your perception, they're not cooperating with your sense of need. And this is the dynamic that happens in a sexless marriage. A man is saying, I'm needy. He's not actually talking that way to himself, and it'd probably be to his benefit if he would. He's feeling a need. He says, she's not fulfilling my needs. She's a villain. I'm a victim. And then he lives in the story of being powerless. He is disempowered because the thing that he wants, he can't have until the villain in his life decides to stop being a villain and start being a hero. And that doesn't happen because the reality is the thing he needs is not sex. It's not necessarily intimacy. It's the deeper need that is addressed when he experiences intimacy with another person. And that, in my experience, is almost always self-worth, value, significance. And so that's why the first stage is you must thoroughly address your relationship with yourself. That always leads to a second stage. And this is an important one to delineate, just for anybody else watching this video. After you have improved your relationship with yourself, which means you have replaced your feeble sense of self-worth and value and significance with a rock-solid belief system where other people and their attitudes and actions towards you do not change your view of your value, worth, and significance. That is bulletproof self-worth, and I can keep helping you get there. That second stage is changing your relationship with sex, because men that have a feeble sense of self-worth have a feeble relationship with sex, because sex becomes something that they approach as a consumer instead of a creator. They don't see sex as an opportunity to give. They think they do, but they get really butthurt when they don't experience it because they're not able to get something. Now, you mentioned specifically here, how do you replace the touch and feel of a woman? Listen, the touch and feel of a woman is a great thing. Sex is a great thing. Intimacy is a great thing. But the moment it becomes about getting something within you that you didn't have at the start, it becomes consuming. It becomes getting. It becomes needy. And that is an indicator that you're not self-sourcing your own needs. So you don't have to replace the touch and desire of a woman. Instead, what I want you to ask yourself, pardon me, is what happens inside of me when I experience the touch and feel of a woman? What is different from before I experience touch and feel of a woman and after? You see, there is an internal change, and it's not because some sort of molecules flow from a woman's genitals through yours and into your body. It's because you experience really a change in your thinking, right? So when you're, pre-sex, you're thinking one way, you have sex, and then you think a new way. And if you feel good, aside from the dopamine and other chemicals flowing through your veins, I'm not talking about physiology here, but if you feel emotionally better, it's because of the meaning that you just gave that encounter. And so you do not have to stop enjoying the touch and feel of a woman. In fact, don't let that go. There's nothing at all wrong with it. It's good for you. Sex and intimacy are wonderful things, but they're not wonderful things when they become a strategy to meet deep emotional shortcomings, such as a low sense of value and worth and significance. And that's what's going on here. And so a man's got to change his relationship with himself so that he changes his relationship with sex, so that sex is no longer a strategy to get, but it is a celebration of the fullness you have with yourself, which you share with your partner, right? You have to be the penetrator as a man, not like you can't be in the spot of, I need you to penetrate me with connection, with intimacy, with feeling good about myself, with feeling accepted, with feeling valuable, with feeling valid. Those are all things that a man uses sex to accomplish when he's stuck in the immature emotional wounds from childhood where he doesn't feel good about himself. And so, as hardcore as it might sound to some people watching this, I would say needy sex is always about a lack of self-worth that you just try to solve with sex. Some men, they don't try to solve it with sex. They try to solve it with a bigger income, bigger biceps, bigger boat, bigger house. And some men, they try to solve it with, can I get this woman to look at me with a sexual interest? But any of that stuff is operating from a deficit in your sense of self. And that's the common theme that I've witnessed in talking to so many men with sexless marriages, is that at the end of the day, when we get real deep and personal, they don't feel good about themselves, and they need another person to feel good about them so that they can feel good about them. And that just shows up in the bedroom. It shows up in their intimacy challenges. Those guys are actually quite scared to initiate. And the reason they're scared to initiate is because they're fearful of rejection, because they can be rejected. And why can a man be rejected? Because he rejects himself, because he's not enough to answer his own questions of value and worth. And so these guys are timid. They don't want to say really what they want. They're very like testing for interest. We'll see if she's interested. And so they hand over basically their sexual power to the woman in their life, saying, hey, you give this to me, and you give it to me often so I can feel okay. But that's not how women work, and a woman doesn't want that responsibility in marriage. And so then when she's not actually initiating and she's not sitting there all of the time doing exactly what he wants, he gets irritated. Hey, why aren't you meeting my needs? And this leads to the erosion of intimacy along with a lot of other things. And so I don't want you to think you have to replace the touch and feel of a woman. I want you to instead think, what does the touch and feel of a woman cause within me? Because it's a meaning that happens within you. You go to a certain place in your thoughts, and if you slow down and sit with it, hey, what happens when I experience touch and feel from a woman to me? Like, what do I think differently? What you'll find is that you just have told yourself in your lifetime that when a woman, I feel touch and feel from a woman, I can feel a certain way about me that I'm not otherwise able to feel about me. And what most people don't realize, brother, is that you can control those stories. You can choose different meanings. You could stop living in the feeble belief system that how other people feel about you means anything. It doesn't. There's 8 billion people on this planet. How many of them need to feel good about you for you to feel good about you? I would suggest none. And the moment we move our sense of self outside of us is the moment we suffer. And that just shows up in a sexless marriage. Now, the last thing I'll share with you, that last stage, just for review and also for people watching this video, is that the last thing a man needs to be ready to do after he's changed his relationship with himself and changed his relationship with sex is he has to change his relationship with the relationship. And that means he has to be willing to be his authentic self no matter what the cost, which means you have to prefer your authenticity and integrity above the relationship, which means when you're in a situation where your relationship and maybe the status of it at some time is putting you in a place where you have to become inauthentic, that you choose you instead of the relationship. Now, here's what I mean. Oftentimes in a sexless marriage, even if a man does these things, he has a partner that just says, I don't see myself ever wanting to have sex again. I don't ever want to have sex again. I can never see myself being intimate with you again. Now, what most guys do, especially if they haven't done those first two stages, is they try to wait it out. But those guys decades later are still waiting it out because they're trying to be patient because they don't want to do the hard thing. Now, here's the thing. If you start a monogamous relationship with a woman, you start with yourself 3 truths. I'm monogamous, I'm sexual, I'm committed in that relationship. And the reason you got married is because your partner had the same 3 commitments. And so if suddenly one of those 3, your partner says, I no longer want that. I'm not sexual anymore, but I want commitment and I'm monogamous, even though that they're not even intimate. Well, that partner changed, and therefore the conditions of why you entered a relationship changed. And so what a man will try to do at that time usually is try to persuade his partner to change back, get sexual again. Can you start wanting sex again? And there are ways you can't persuade them to do that, but a lot of times a woman loses her sexual interest precisely because a man became needy and used sex for his self-worth. But sometimes, despite fixing that, a woman just is not interested in intimacy. But see, if you're still a sexual man and you want a monogamous commitment and you're committed to her, you haven't changed. And so if you actually then modify one of those 3 things that you set out the relationship with, you're editing yourself. You're becoming inauthentic in order to keep a relationship with a woman who changed. And the hard truth is, if you do that, you're not a trustable person. You're not a person of integrity because you have a truth that you're unwilling to walk in. You have a truth that you're hiding. If you're a sexual man, you want a monogamous commitment to one woman, and you're in a relationship with a woman who says, I don't want that, you're compromising. And a man that is compromising is not a trustable man. And a man that is compromising, in addition to not being trustable, is not a man walking in integrity. And so that's the hard thing for some men, especially men that have been in a really long relationship, or maybe their partner has health challenges by now, or maybe they're from a religious background that taught them that partnership should be unconditional. Mixing up, by the way, unconditional love and unconditional partnership, which are 2 very different things. And so those guys keep sacrificing their truth, their core, in order to stay in a relationship that does not work for them. And so men in that spot have to come to a place where they say, you know what, it's more important to me to be authentic and to be a man of integrity than to be married to this person. And interestingly, when a guy is willing to do that, oftentimes there's a shift. And I can't explain it other than to say it's the natural impact of polarity, that when a man moves more in the direction of his true, authentic, masculine self, it invites a polarizing response in his feminine partner. She moves more in a feminine direction, more towards attraction, because that guy is trustable, because he has a healthy relationship with sex, and he has a healthy relationship with himself. And so to kind of bring this back full circle about self-sourcing intimacy, what you need to do more than anything, brother, is you need to have a radically deep level of self-acceptance. You need to have a belief of your value and worth and significance that is absolutely sourced in self, not in other people, not in her. And when you're doing well with that, the way you'll know you're doing well with that is that you'll be able to look at your partner at any time and accept, like, hey, that's who she is. And if that's the story she wants to live in, and if she doesn't want to be intimate, that's about her. That's not about me. And that changes your relationship with sex and with the relationship itself. And it gives you the freedom to stop seeing sex as a strategy to meet your deeper emotional needs, specifically a deficit of feeling good about yourself. then that gives you the freedom to say, you know what, if I need to, I'm ready to let go of a relationship that does not actually allow me to continue on my life as a man of integrity. It requires that I lie to myself about my desires, my interests, and my fundamental way of being. And so when a man addresses all that, most men by then, the vast majority, are actually seeing intimacy return to the relationship, because they've gotten actually the things worked out that needed to be worked out, which was all stuff within themselves, their kind of mindsets, their judgment, their anger, their frustration, all stuff which, by the way, pushes a woman away. And instead, they have had a restoration. And so that's the restoration I would love to see for you. I think you're doing really well. I'm talking to the man who wrote me this email in 1.75 of those. And I know you don't want to lose everything you have worked for, your home and your assets and even your time with your wife. I still don't believe you need to. I think if you keep pushing on in your repair of your sense of self-worth and your relationship to sex, I think you get what you want. Now, I could say that confidently because in our time together, when you started this, right away or within a few months, it actually did break some kind of log jams in the intimacy department. And that's normal, that a man, kind of finds his groove a little bit, some mojo, he walks in it a little bit, and then he kind of gets sheepish again, and he kind of falls back into his old way. And I think you're there now. I think you just need to keep doing the reps of practicing better stories and beliefs about your value and worth. And when you do, and you experience some intimacy again, it'll train your brain, oh, okay, this is the way to be, this is the way to be. And that is how you get past that inertia and develop the momentum to make this a new way of being. And so I hope I have given you some insights today. I just want to affirm that your desires for sex are good. Sexual desire in a man is not a defect. It's not a defect to experience loneliness. It's not a defect or a weakness to want to be with a woman. None of that is bad. Those are all good desires. But those desires, as good as they are, if we are lacking a solid sense of self, will be hijacked by that deficit, and that's what caused our problem. So if I've left any questions out for you and you want to follow up with an email, I would love to hear from you. If you're watching this video and you're not the man I'm talking to and you've thought, wow, I learned some things here today, that was really insightful. If you want to talk with me further or one of the mentors in my community about how to start repairing your suffering relationship, how to move out of disconnection and sexlessness into passion and thriving intimacy, I would love to hear from you. You can look down in the video description and you'll find links for how you can schedule a free consultation. We'll talk about your situation and love to get to know you a little bit more. Again, I'm Sven Masterson. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.